My husband's ex launched a quiet campaign against me, and it cost me my career. I remember the exact moment it all unraveled, sitting in my home office that Thursday afternoon, the kind of gray, drizzly day where the rain taps insistently on the window like it's trying to warn you of something. My laptop screen glowing with the email from HR that felt like a punch to the gut, the subject line reading, "Notice of Termination," in that sterile corporate font. And as I scanned the words, performance issues, client complaints, breach of conduct, my heart hammered because none of it made sense. I'd just closed a major deal last week. My reviews had been stellar for years. But there it was, effective immediately, no severance, just a cold directive to return my company property by end of day. And I sat there, staring, my coffee mug cooling beside me, the steam long gone, wondering if it was a mistake, some glitch in the system. So I picked up my phone with trembling fingers and dialed my boss, Sarah, who answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and professional. "I'm sorry, but the decision is final," she said. And when I pressed for details, she mentioned anonymous reports of unprofessional behavior, leaked emails that painted me as unreliable, even sabotage in client files. But she couldn't disclose more due to policy, hanging up before I could argue, leaving me in that suffocating silence, the kids' artwork tacked to the wall mocking me with their crayon smiles. And that's when the doubt crept in, a whisper at first, remembering the odd glances at the last team meeting, the way projects had been reassigned without explanation over the past months. And I thought back to the promotion I'd been gunning for, the one that slipped away to someone junior, but now it all clicked like a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. So I opened my work email archive, scrolling through chains I'd dismissed as spam or errors, finding patterns in the complaints. Clients I'd never offended suddenly furious, documents altered with my signature on them, and buried in the metadata, a recurring IP address that didn't match our office. So I copied it into a search engine, my pulse racing, and up came a forum post about tracing locations, leading me to a tool that pinpointed it to a suburb just outside town, the same one where my husband's ex, Vanessa, lived. That woman I'd tried so hard to forget, the one who'd made our early marriage a battlefield with her constant texts and surprise visits under the guise of co-parenting their son from her brief fling with Alex before we met. But we'd set boundaries years ago, or so I thought, and now this address glared at me, her address, confirmed by a quick cross-check with Alex's old custody papers in the filing cabinet downstairs. And the realization hit like nausea, wave after wave, that she'd been behind it, a quiet vendetta, hacking or phishing or whatever tech-savvy spite she could muster, because why else would someone target my career so meticulously, chipping away until I was fired? And I closed the laptop, my hands cold, staring at the rain-streaked window, thinking of all the late nights I'd pulled to build that job, the marketing director role I'd earned through sheer grit after Emily was born, balancing school runs and soccer practices with conference calls. Alex always supportive, or so he'd said, bringing home takeout on those hectic evenings, us collapsing on the couch with Netflix after tucking Emily in. But now doubt poisoned even those memories. Had he known? Had Vanessa confided in him during one of their necessary check-ins about their now teenage son, Tyler, who we saw every other weekend? And I felt the betrayal deepen, not just from her, but the possibility of his silence. So I waited, the hours dragging until Alex came home from his engineering job, the front door clicking open at 6, his voice calling out, "Honey, and home," like nothing was wrong, and Emily bounding down from her room, her 10-year-old energy filling the space with chatter about her science project, a volcano made of baking soda and vinegar. And I forced a smile, helping set the table for the pasta he'd picked up, but inside I was unraveling, each bite tasting like ash. And after Emily's bedtime story, her small hand in mine as I read about adventurous rabbits, I tucked her in, kissing her forehead, whispering sweet dreams, my voice cracking just a little. And then downstairs, Alex on the couch, scrolling his phone, a beer in hand, the living room lamp casting shadows that felt ominous, and I sat across from him, my knees pulled up, and said, "We need to talk," my tone flat. And he looked up, concern etching his face. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting the phone down. And I laid it out, the email, the termination, the traced IP, Vanessa's name hanging in the air like smoke, and his eyes widened. "That can't be," he muttered, but I saw the flicker, the guilt or surprise or something undefinable. And I pressed, "Did you know? Has she said anything?" And he shook his head, too quickly perhaps. "No, God no, but she's been off lately, complaining about Tyler's grades, blaming me for not being there enough." And I felt the anger arise, hot and unbidden. "Off? She's ruined my life, Alex, my career gone because of her jealousy or whatever grudge she holds." And he reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The touch felt like a lie. And we argued then, voices low, not to wake Emily, me accusing him of not cutting ties firmly enough, him defending that co-parenting required contact. But the words blurred into pain, my tears coming unbidden, sobs that racked my body as I thought of the mortgage, the bills, Emily's dance classes we'd have to cut. And he tried to hold me, murmuring, "We'll fix this, call a lawyer tomorrow." But I shrugged him off, the trust fracturing like glass under pressure. And that night, I slept in the guest room, the bed cold and unfamiliar, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Vanessa, the polite smiles at Tyler's birthday parties, the way she'd hug Alex a second too long, her social media posts about single mom struggles that always seemed pointed. And I thought back to how long she'd planned this, a quiet campaign, so quiet, so insidious, using her IT skills from her job at that tech firm to worm into my professional life, fabricating complaints, maybe even impersonating me in emails. And the grief swelled, not just for the job, but for the security I'd built, the identity as a working mom who'd had it all, now stripped away, leaving me raw and exposed. And as dawn filtered through the curtains, gray like my mood, I heard Alex moving in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling, probably making my favorite blend in a futile peace offering. But I stayed in bed, curling into myself, the fallout settling like dust, knowing this was just the beginning of the storm. The pain so acute it felt physical, a weight on my chest that made breathing hard. And I thought of Emily, innocent in all this, how I'd have to explain mommy not going to work anymore, the school run now my only routine, and the anger mixed with sorrow, a toxic brew that kept me there, immobile, as the day began without me. That first full night after the confrontation stretched into something endless and suffocating. The guest room clock glowing 1:47 a.m. in red digits that seemed to mock my inability to close my eyes. The sheets twisted around my legs like they were trying to hold me down, while my mind raced in frantic circles, replaying Alex's face when I said Vanessa's name, the quick blink, the slight parting of his lips before he spoke, as if he'd rehearsed denial 1,000 times without ever expecting to use it. And now I couldn't unsee the hesitation, the way his hand had hovered midair when he tried to touch me, falling back to his side when I flinched. And the silence that followed our argument had been worse than the raised voices, thick with everything we weren't saying. So I'd retreated upstairs, leaving him on the couch with the television flickering mute sports highlights he wasn't watching, and I'd heard him eventually climb the stairs around midnight, pausing outside the guest room door long enough that I held my breath, waiting for a knock that never came, only the soft creak of our bedroom door closing down the hall, the finality of it landing like another small wound. And now here I was, alone in the narrow bed that smelt faintly of laundry detergent and dust, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazy shadows, my phone face down on the nightstand because I didn't trust myself not to scroll through Vanessa's carefully curated Instagram, those filtered photos of her and Tyler at the beach last summer, her caption about making memories with my favorite boy that had always felt like a subtle jab at the family Alex and I were building. And I resisted, barely, curling tighter under the thin blanket, the radiator clicking on and off in irregular bursts, each cycle reminding me how cold the house felt tonight, how empty, even with 3 people under one roof. And sometime after 2, I gave up on sleep, slipping downstairs in socks so I wouldn't wake Emily, the kitchen tiles icy underfoot, and I flicked on the under-cabinet light, just enough glow to see without startling the dark, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, then opened the fridge anyway, staring at the leftover pasta congealing in its Tupperware, the half carton of milk, the yogurt pouches Emily liked, ordinary things that suddenly looked fragile, like evidence of a life I might not be able to keep providing for. And that's when the tears came again, silent at first, then shuddering, and I slid down to sit on the floor with my back against the cabinets, knees to chest, letting them fall because there was no one to see, no one to pretend strength for in this moment. And I thought about calling my sister in Seattle, the 3-hour time difference meaning she'd still be awake, probably grading papers or watching reruns, but pride stopped me, or maybe fear that saying it aloud would make it more real. So instead, I sat there hugging myself until the crying eased into hiccups, the kind that hurt your ribs. And eventually I heard footsteps, soft and careful, Alex appearing in the doorway in his old gray sweatpants and the faded university tee he slept in, hair mussed, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept either, and he didn't speak right away, just leaned against the frame, watching me with that careful expression he used when Emily had a fever, or when we fought about money, the one that said he was measuring how much damage had already been done. And after a long beat, he said very quietly, "I called her." And my stomach dropped, because of course he had. That was the responsible thing, the co-parent thing. But the timing felt like betrayal number 2. And I wiped my face with the sleeve of my hoodie, asking, "What does she say?" My voice raw and small. And he exhaled, sliding down to sit across from me on the floor so we were knee to knee, but not touching. She denied it, completely. Said she wouldn't know how to do something like that even if she wanted to, which she doesn't. And then she got angry, asked why I was accusing her instead of supporting you, turned it around like I was the one attacking her. And I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. Of course she did. And he nodded, looking down at his hands, fingers laced tight. I told her I needed proof either way, that if she's innocent, she should let me look at her devices, her browser history, anything. And she hung up on me. And the admission hung there, heavy, because we both knew Vanessa never hung up unless she was cornered or guilty or both. And for the first time, I saw real doubt in his eyes, not the defensive flicker from earlier, but something deeper, a crack in the loyalty he'd always extended to her for Tyler's sake. And he rubbed his face hard. I should have seen it sooner. The way she's been needling, the passive comments about how you're always working, how Tyler misses out because I'm distracted by our life. I thought it was just jealousy talking, old habits. But this? He gestured vaguely toward me, toward the whole wreckage. This is cruel. And hearing him name it made fresh tears spill. Because yes, cruel was exactly the word. And I whispered, she took my job, Alex. The one thing I was good at. The one thing that made me feel like I wasn't just Emily's mom or your wife, but someone who mattered out there. And he reached then, tentative, his palm open on the tile between us, and for a moment I placed my hand in his, cold fingers meeting warm. And we stayed like that, not moving, not speaking, just breathing in that small circle of light while the house settled around us, the fridge humming, a car passing on the wet street outside. And he finally said, I'm so sorry. I didn't protect you. The words cracking open something raw in both of us, and I didn't absolve him, couldn't yet, but I didn't pull away either. Just squeezed once, weakly, before letting go, and we sat there until the sky began to lighten behind the blinds, gray bleeding into pale gray. And when Emily's alarm went off upstairs, that cheerful chime she'd chosen for school mornings, he stood first, offering his hand to help me up, and I took it, legs stiff, heart still bruised, but standing nonetheless. And we moved through the routine on autopilot, him starting the coffee while I went to wake Emily, her sleepy hug around my waist the only thing that felt solid. And as she chattered about her field trip permission slip, I glanced at Alex across the kitchen, our eyes meeting over her head for a second, a silent agreement that we would get through the morning, the day, the next conversation, even if trust was in pieces on the floor, even if the night had stripped us raw and left us no closer to answers, only closer to the truth that whatever came next, we couldn't pretend anymore. And that small, painful honesty felt like the first real step, terrifying and necessary, as the coffee finished brewing and the smell filled the room, ordinary and comforting in a way that almost hurt. The next few days blurred into a careful choreography of protection, every movement deliberate so Emily wouldn't sense the fault lines running through the house. Though at 10, she already noticed too much. The way I answered questions with half-smiles that didn't reach my eyes. How Alex and I spoke in clipped, neutral tones when we thought she couldn't hear. The sudden absence of my laptop on the kitchen counter where it used to live, charging while I scrolled job boards late at night. And I hated that she was absorbing it all like a sponge. So I doubled down on normalcy, waking her with gentle back rubs instead of the usual cheerful rise and shine, packing her lunch with the exact combination of turkey roll-ups, baby carrots, and the little heart-shaped note she pretended embarrassed her, but always kept, driving the school route with the radio tunes to her current favorite pop station, even though the upbeat lyrics grated against the ache in my chest. And when she asked why I wasn't going to work anymore, I said, Mommy's taking a little break to figure out some grown-up things, keeping my voice light, steady, the same tone I used when explaining why we couldn't get a puppy yet. And she studied me in the rearview mirror for a long second before nodding. Okay, but you're still coming to the parent-teacher conference next week, right? And I promised yes, throat tight, because that conference now loomed as one of the few anchors left in my calendar, proof that I still belonged somewhere, even if the office had erased me. And after drop-off, I came home to the quiet that felt louder than ever, the dishwasher humming its final cycle from breakfast, Alex already gone to his early meeting, so I sat at the kitchen table with my untouched coffee growing cold and opened my phone to the growing list of rejection emails. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your experience doesn't quite align at this time. Each one a small confirmation that Vanessa's sabotage had rippled outward, tainting references, perhaps even planting whispers in industry circles I'd once moved through confidently. And the helplessness clawed at me until I had to stand, pace, finally text my best friend, Mara, "Can you talk?" And she called within minutes, her voice warm through the speaker as I wandered into the living room, curling into the corner of the couch where the throw blanket still held the faint scent of Alex's aftershave from the night before. And I told her everything, the firing, the IP trace, Vanessa's denial, Alex's late-night call to her, the way trust felt like sand slipping through my fingers. And Mara listened without interrupting until I ran out of words, then said softly, "You need boundaries, hard ones, starting with him." And she was right. So that evening, when Alex came home carrying grocery bags, extra milk, Emily's favorite cereal, a bottle of the Pinot we used to drink on Fridays, I waited until she was in the shower after soccer practice, water running upstairs, and I met him in the pantry doorway, arms crossed, voice low. We can't keep pretending this is just between us and her. Emily's going to feel it soon if she hasn't already, and I won't let this poison her, too. And he set the bags down slowly, nodding. I know, I've been thinking the same. And for the first time since the confrontation, I saw exhaustion etched deep around his eyes, the kind that comes from carrying guilt and worry at once. So I laid out the rules, simple and non-negotiable. No more unscheduled calls with Vanessa unless it was about Tyler's immediate safety or school emergencies. All communication in writing so I could see it if I needed to. Joint decisions on anything involving Tyler that might overlap with our life. And he was to tell her clearly that any further interference, perceived or real, would mean revisiting custody arrangements through lawyers, not as a threat, but as the boundary she'd forced us to draw. And he listened without arguing, just said, I'll text her tonight, copy you. And when he did, right there at the kitchen island while I chopped vegetables for stir-fry, I watched over his shoulder as he typed, we need to keep things strictly about Tyler. No more personal comments, no involvement in our professional or personal matters. If anything like what happened to my name occurs again, we'll have to involve attorneys for everyone's sake. Let's both focus on being the best parents we can be. He hit send, then turned the screen toward me so I could read her reply when it came minutes later. 3 dots pulsing, disappearing, pulsing again, then finally, understood. I'm sorry things have been tense. Tyler's doing okay? A deflection wrapped in concern, classic Vanessa. But Alex didn't take the bait, just answered, he's fine. We'll talk about his science fair project this weekend, and left it there. No softening, no reassurance, and I felt a small, surprised loosening in my chest. Not forgiveness yet, but acknowledgement that he was choosing us, at least in this moment. And later, after Emily was asleep, her damp hair fanned on the pillow, stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, we sat on the back porch steps, despite the chill, coats zipped, sharing the last of the Pinot from mismatched mugs because the wine glasses were still in the dishwasher, and I asked, do you believe her when she says she didn't do it? And he took a slow sip, staring at the dark yard where the swing set loomed like a skeleton in the moonlight. I want to, for Tyler's sake, but the timing, the specificity, it's too much coincidence. And even if she didn't hack anything herself, maybe she talked to someone who did, planted the seed. I don't know anymore. And his honesty, unguarded, made me reach for his hand, cold knuckles against cold knuckles. And we stayed like that, listening to the distant hum of traffic, a dog barking 2 streets over, the occasional drip from the gutter after yesterday's rain. And I said, I'm scared we won't get past this. And he turned to me, eyes searching mine in the dim porch light. We might not get back to exactly what we were, but we can build something new, stronger maybe, if we're both willing to look at the cracks instead of papering over them. And though the words didn't erase the hurt, they couldn't, they planted a seed of possibility, fragile, but there. And when we finally went inside, locking the door behind us, turning lights room by room, I didn't head to the guest room. Instead, I followed him upstairs, slipped under the covers on my side of the bed, not touching, but close enough to feel his warmth, his breathing slow and even beside me, and though sleep still came in fits, haunted by flashes of office hallways I'd never walk again, client faces I'd never see, for the first time since the email, I didn't feel entirely alone in the dark, the space between us a bridge under repair rather than a chasm, and as the house settled into quiet, I let myself hope, just a little, that protecting Emily meant protecting whatever was left of us too, one careful, painful step at a time. By the following weekend, the house felt like it was holding its breath, every routine amplified by the effort to appear unbroken. Emily's soccer game on Saturday morning under a sky so blue it seemed unfair. Me on the sidelines in sunglasses that hid the shadows under my eyes, cheering louder than necessary when she scored her first goal of the season. Alex beside me, clapping with both hands, our shoulders brushing once when we both stood to applaud. A contact so small it might have been accidental but wasn't. And afterward, we took her for ice cream at the little shop on Maple Street, the 3 of us squeezed into a booth with sticky tables and the hum of the freezer case in the background. Emily recounting every play in breathless detail while chocolate dripped down her cone onto her jersey. And for 45 minutes, I almost believed we could outrun the wreckage if we just kept moving forward like this, normal parents on a normal Saturday. But the moment we got home and she ran upstairs to change, the quiet returned, heavier than before. So I told Alex I needed space, not separation exactly, but distance enough to think without the constant reminder of his presence, his guilt, the way he watched me like I might shatter if he said the wrong thing. And he didn't argue, just nodded and said, whatever you need, his voice careful, almost relieved maybe that I was naming it instead of letting it fester violently. So I packed an overnight bag, jeans, a couple sweaters, my journal, the charger, and drove to Morrow's place an hour away, her condo in the next county where the buildings were newer and the streets quieter. No kid spikes on the lawns, just manicured shrubs and parking spots assigned by number. And when she opened the door, she pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender laundry soap and the faint trace of her vanilla candle. No questions at first, just, come in, I made soup. and we sat on her balcony wrapped in throws against the October chill, bowls of butternut squash steaming between us, the city lights starting to flicker on below like scattered stars. And I talked then, really talked, about the job interviews that went nowhere, the LinkedIn messages from former colleagues who suddenly went silent after catching up, the creeping suspicion that Vanessa had reached further than one hacked email chain, perhaps whispering to mutual contacts or posting anonymously in industry forums. And Mara listened, nodding, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my wrist, and when I finished, she said, "You're allowed to be furious, and you're allowed to grieve it, but don't let her define what comes next." And that night, I slept on her pull-out couch under a quilt her mom had made, the kind with perfect tiny stitches that felt like proof someone had once taken time to care. And though I woke twice from dreams of walking endless empty office corridors, the panic was softer, less suffocating, because Mara was there, in the next room, breathing steadily, a living reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. Sunday morning, we walked to the farmer's market, bought apples and fresh bread and a bunch of sunflowers that looked too bright for how I felt inside. And over coffee at a corner cafe, I started making a list on my phone. Practical things, rules for transparency if Alex and I were going to try rebuilding, full access to each other's phones and emails if either asked, no deleting messages with Vanessa without discussion, joint bank alerts for anything over a certain amount, so no financial surprises could hide, couples counseling booked within the week, even if it meant waiting lists, and individual therapy for me because the anger felt like a second skin I couldn't shed alone. And when I texted the list to Alex, he replied almost immediately. I agreed to all of it. I already called Dr. Ellis's office, the one Mara recommended last year, and got us an initial session for Thursday evening, virtual if that's easier. No excuses, no hedging, just action. And seeing those words on the screen cracked something open in me, not warmth exactly, but a crack where warmth might eventually seep in. So I drove home that afternoon with the sunflowers on the passenger seat, their heavy heads nodding with every turn, and when I pulled into the driveway, Emily was outside kicking a soccer ball against the garage door, Alex watching from the porch steps with a mug in his hands, and she ran over, shouting, "Mommy's back!" hugging me so hard around the waist I almost dropped the flowers, her cheek pressed to my stomach smelling of grass and shampoo, and Alex stood, hesitant, then walked down the steps and took the bag from my shoulder without asking, our fingers brushing in the transfer, and inside he put the sunflowers in a vase on the kitchen table while I unpacked, Emily chattering about the new art project at school, a self-portrait collage due next Friday, and when she finally went to finish her homework, I turned to Alex, who was rinsing mugs at the sink, and said, "I'm not ready to pretend everything's fine, but I'm willing to see what happens if we both follow the rules." And he dried his hands slowly, turned to face me. "That's more than I deserve right now, but I'll take it." His voice low, eyes steady, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel the urge to step back when he moved closer. Instead, I let him fold me into a careful embrace, chin resting on my head, his heartbeat steady against my ear. Not passionate or desperate, just present. And we stood there in the middle of the kitchen with the late afternoon light slanting through the window, dust motes drifting like tiny planets, the dishwasher starting its cycle with a familiar rumble. And though the hurt still lived under my ribs, sharp when I breathed too deeply, the decision to try, to set terms, to demand accountability, to carve out space, and then choose to return, felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself from the wreckage Vanessa had made. Not victory, not healing, but a deliberate act of survival. And as Emily called down, "Dinner soon," from upstairs, we pulled apart, not quite smiling, but not quite strangers either. And I said yes, I'd make tacos, the kind with extra cheese she liked, and Alex offered to chop the onions, and we moved around each other in the familiar dance of meal prep, shoulders occasionally touching, the silence between us no longer hostile, but watchful, waiting, the first tentative threads of a new understanding beginning to weave themselves into the fabric of what we'd almost lost, fragile as spider silk, but there, nonetheless, holding against the pull of everything that had come before. Thursday evening arrived with a kind of ordinary anticipation that made the stakes feel almost surreal. Me sitting at the kitchen table after Emily had gone to bed with her headphones on, listening to an audiobook about mythical creatures. The house quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling floorboards. My laptop open to the virtual therapy waiting room, where a soft blue screen displayed, "Dr. Ellis will join you shortly," and I kept refreshing the page even though it wasn't necessary, my palms damp against the mousepad, because this was the first time I'd ever sat down with a professional to unpack anything deeper than mild postpartum anxiety years ago, and now the weight of what I needed to say felt enormous, like trying to describe a storm from inside it. And when the video connected, Dr. Ellis appeared, mid-50s, calm gray eyes behind wire frames, a bookshelf behind her filled with plants and framed degrees. And she smiled gently, asked how I was today, the question so simple it caught me off guard, and I heard myself say, "Not great," the understatement hanging there until I added, I was fired last week because of something my husband's ex did, or at least I'm almost sure she did, and now everything feels contaminated. And the words tumbled out then, halting at first, then faster. The anonymous complaints, the traced IP, Alex's call to her, the boundaries we'd set, the way I still flinched sometimes when he reached for me in the dark. And Dr. Ellis listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, jotting something on a notepad I couldn't see. And when I finally ran dry, she said, very quietly, "It sounds like you've lost more than a job. You've lost a sense of safety in the world you built. And that betrayal is layered by her actions, by the possibility he didn't see them coming or stop them sooner, by the system that believed the lies over your truth." And hearing it framed that way made my throat close up, tears sliding hot down my cheeks. And she gave me space to cry. No rush, just the soft sound of her breathing on the other end until I could speak again. And we spent the rest of the hour mapping what safety might look like now. Small, concrete things like checking references before applying anywhere new, keeping a private journal of every interaction with Alex so I could track my own feelings without second-guessing them later, allowing myself to say, "I need a minute," when the anger surged without explanation. And by the time we ended, I felt lighter, not fixed, but unburdened, like I'd handed over a piece of the load I'd been carrying alone. And after logging off, I sat there in the dim kitchen light, staring at my reflection in the dark window, mascara smudged, hair in a messy knot, and for once, the sight didn't disgust me. It just looked like someone who was trying, and that was enough for tonight. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, the alarm still off, light filtering pale through the blinds, and instead of scrolling job sites, I made coffee for both of us, his black, mine with the oat milk we'd started buying last year, and carried the mugs upstairs, setting his on the nightstand while he was still half asleep, beard scruffy against the pillow, and when his eyes opened, I said, simply, "I had my first session last night. No preamble, no accusation, just fact," and he propped himself on an elbow, searching my face. "How was it?" Voice rough from sleep, and I sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that our knees touched through the comforter. Hard. Good hard. She helped me see that the anger isn't just at Vanessa, it's at the helplessness, at feeling like I can't protect what's mine anymore. And he nodded slowly, reached out and rested his hand on my thigh, not grabbing, just there, warm through the fabric. And I didn't move away, let the contact settle, a small permission I hadn't given in weeks. And he said, "I started looking into individual therapy too, found someone who does virtual on Tuesdays. I don't want to keep fumbling in the dark with this." And the admission, quiet and unprompted, cracked another layer of the wall between us, not because it erased what happened, but because it showed he was willing to sit in his own discomfort the way I was sitting in mine. And later that day, after Emily's school bus pulled away, I texted him from the living room where I was folding laundry. "Can we try something tonight? Just sit together after she's asleep, no phones, maybe talk about one thing each that felt okay today?" And he replied from his office downtown, "Yes, I'd like that." So after dinner, spaghetti with meatballs, Emily's request, sauce splattered on her chin as she twirled noodles, we cleared the table together, loaded the dishwasher side by side, elbows brushing in the narrow space, and when she was finally tucked in with her reading light on, I poured us each a small glass of the red we kept for evenings like this. Not celebration exactly, but acknowledgement. And we sat on the couch, not quite touching, but facing each other, knees angled in, and I went first. Today, I applied to 3 jobs without crying afterward. That felt okay. And he listened, really listened, no interrupting to fix or reassure, then said, "I told my boss I need to leave early next Thursday for therapy. He asked if everything was all right, and I said it's personal, but I'm handling it." Saying it out loud to someone outside us felt steadying. And we traded these small truths back and forth like offerings, careful not to overwhelm. The television off for once, just the tick of the wall clock and the faint sound of rain starting against the windows. And when the glasses were empty, I set mine down, looked at him, really looked, the lines around his eyes deeper now, the way his shoulders carried tension even at rest. And I said, "I miss touching you without wondering if it means something it doesn't," the vulnerability surprising me as it left my mouth. And he exhaled, set his glass aside too, then slowly, giving me time to pull back, lifted my hand and brought it to his lips, kissed the knuckles once, softly, no demand in it, just gratitude. And I felt the warmth spread up my arm. Not desire yet, but recognition, a reminder that our bodies still remembered kindness, even if our minds were still arguing. And we stayed like that, hands linked on the cushion between us, until the rain picked up and the house felt less like a battlefield and more like a place where 2 bruised people were learning, slowly, how to lower their guards again, one honest hour at a time. The quiet hope flickering like a pilot light that hadn't gone out after all, steady enough now to warm the room if we kept feeding it carefully, deliberately, without expecting miracles overnight. The first joint session with Dr. Ellis felt like stepping onto a frozen pond, each word tested for cracks before it left my mouth. The virtual room, the same soft blue as my individual calls, but now shared. Alex's face in the smaller window beside mine, his background the home office with a framed photo of us three at the lake last summer, turned slightly so only the water showed, a deliberate choice I noticed but didn't comment on, and Dr. Ellis began by asking us each to name one feeling we'd carried into the room tonight. No elaboration yet, just the raw word. And I said, fear, the syllable landing heavy because it was truer than anger now. Fear that saying the wrong thing would shatter the fragile progress we'd made. Fear that Vanessa's shadow would always loom larger than our efforts to outrun it. And Alex paused, rubbed his thumb along the edge of his desk, then said, shame. The admission so quiet the microphone almost missed it. But I heard, felt it settle in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading. And Dr. Ellis nodded, thanked us for the honesty, then invited us to unpack those words together, starting wherever felt safest. And after a long silence where the only sound was the faint tick of my wall clock picked up by my laptop mic, Alex spoke first, voice steady but low. The shame is because I didn't see how far she'd go, how much damage her resentment could do when I kept feeding it with contact, with not drawing the line harder years ago. I thought I was being fair to Tyler, but I was leaving the door open for her to hurt you, and that makes me feel like I failed as your partner long before the firing. And hearing him name it without excuses, without shifting blame, cracked something open in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a glimpse of the man I'd married, the one who used to leave sticky notes on the fridge with dumb jokes when I had deadlines. And I swallowed, then said, my fear is that even if we rebuild, I'll always wonder if another crisis will come from her direction, if I'll ever feel secure again, like my life can't be quietly dismantled by someone who resents what we have. And Dr. Ellis asked gentle follow-ups, how that fear showed up in daily moments, what small proofs of safety we'd already experienced since setting boundaries, and we answered haltingly, me mentioning how he'd forwarded every text from Vanessa without me asking, him noting the way I'd started leaving my phone unlocked on the counter again, tiny gestures that felt enormous in context, and slowly the conversation deepened, peeling back layers we'd both avoided, how his guilt had made him overcompensate with Emily, taking on extra bedtime stories and weekend outings so I could rest, but in doing so he'd pulled away emotionally, afraid to burden me further, how my withdrawal had looked like rejection to him, reinforcing his shame, how Vanessa's campaign hadn't just cost me a job but had weaponized the very independence I'd prized, making me question whether ambition had made me a target or whether staying home would have prevented it all, a spiral of self-blame neither of us had voiced until now, and Dr. Ellis guided us through it without judgment, reflecting back what she heard. It sounds like both of you have been protecting the other in ways that accidentally widened the distance, and when the hour was nearly up, she suggested an experiment for the week ahead, one physical act of reconnection each day, chosen together, no pressure for it to lead anywhere, just presence, holding hands during a movie, a hug before bed, sitting shoulder to shoulder while reading separate books, and we agreed, tentative but willing, and after logging off, we stayed on the couch in the living room, laptop closed, the house dark except for the lamp beside us, casting a warm pool of light, Emily long asleep upstairs, and I looked at him, really looked, saw the tension still etched in his jaw, the way his fingers flexed and unflexed against his thigh, and I said, let's start now, voice barely above a whisper, and he nodded, shifted closer until our thighs touched, then very slowly reached for my hand, lacing our fingers together, palm to palm, the callus on his ring finger from years of holding tools familiar against my skin, and we sat like that for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, breathing in sync, no words needed, just the quiet proof that bodies could remember trust even when minds were still arguing, and when I finally leaned my head against his shoulder, he didn't tense, just turned slightly so I fit better in the curve of his neck, his free hand coming up to rest lightly on my hair, stroking once, twice, the motion so careful it made my eyes sting, and I whispered, I don't hate you, the closest I could come to saying I still loved him underneath the hurt, and he exhaled shakily, pressed his lips to the top of my head, murmured, I know, and I'm going to keep earning the right to hear more than that. No promises of perfection, just commitment to the slow work, and we stayed entwined until my neck cramped, and we both laughed softly at the awkwardness, the first real shared laughter in weeks, small and rusty but real, then went upstairs together, brushed teeth side by side at the double sink, the domesticity of it suddenly precious, the way he handed me my floss without asking, how I nudged the toothpaste cap closed after he left it open, and in bed I didn't turn my back, instead I faced him, our hands finding each other again under the covers, fingers loosely linked between us, and though sleep came slowly, haunted still by flashes of that termination email and Vanessa's smiling profile pic on Tyler's phone, the warmth of his palm anchored me, a quiet reminder that we were in the same room, on the same side of the fight now, naming the deeper fractures, his conflict avoidance, my fear of vulnerability, the way we'd both let external pressures erode our partnership, and beginning, painstakingly, to bridge them with honesty and these small, deliberate touches, each one a vote for staying, for believing that love could be rebuilt not in grand gestures, but in the patient accumulation of moments like this, hands held in the dark, breaths mingling, the first tentative steps toward a closeness that might one day feel earned, rather than endangered, scarred but no longer bleeding. And as his breathing evened into sleep, I stayed awake a little longer, listening to the rain tap against the window again, feeling the slow thaw in my chest, not complete, but beginning, a cautious hope taking root in the space where despair had lived too long. The idea for the family weekend came up almost accidentally during one of our now weekly joint sessions with Dr. Ellis, when she asked what small shared experience might feel like a bridge rather than a test. And Emily, who'd been allowed to join the last 10 minutes of the previous call because she'd asked why Mommy and Daddy were talking to the computer lady so much, blurted out, "Can we go to the cabin again? The one with the lake and the fire pit?" Her voice so hopeful through the speaker that Alex and I exchanged a look across the couch, the same look we used to share when she was a toddler, begging for one more story. And before either of us could hedge, Dr. Ellis said gently, "That sounds like a beautiful intention. Time away from routines, just the three of you, no distractions." And so we booked it. The same rented lake cabin 2 hours north we'd gone to every summer since Emily was 6. Nothing fancy, just pine walls, a screened porch overlooking the water, a stone fireplace that smoked if you didn't open the flue right. And though the drive up that Friday after school felt weighted, Emily in the back singing along to her playlist, oblivious, while Alex and I held hands over the gear shift in careful silence, my thumb occasionally tracing the vein on the back of his hand, like I was reminding myself it was still there. I let myself hope the change of air might loosen something stuck between us. We arrived just as the sun dipped behind the trees, the sky streaked orange and pink over the still lake, and Emily bolted out first, running down the short path to the dock with her arms wide, like she could hug the whole view, shouting, "It's the same swing!" And Alex unloaded bags while I carried in the cooler of groceries we'd stopped for, burgers for grilling, s'mores supplies, fresh corn, the kind of food that felt like permission to be uncomplicated. And when I stepped onto the porch, he was already there, setting down the last suitcase. And he turned, pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than a hello, chin resting on my hair, murmuring, "Thank you for saying yes to this." And I let myself lean in, breathe the wood smoke scent already clinging to his flannel, feel the steady rise and fall of his chest. And for the first time, the embrace didn't carry an undercurrent of apology. It just felt like two people choosing to stand together in the same small space. Saturday morning dawned crisp, the kind of fall air that makes your lungs feel clean, and we hiked the short trail around the lake, Emily leading with a stick she used to poke at interesting rocks, chattering about the leaf colors. "This one's like fire, this one's like pumpkin pie." And Alex walked beside me, our steps syncing without effort, occasionally brushing fingers when the path narrowed. And when Emily darted ahead to chase a squirrel, we fell into step closer, and he said quietly, "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing this. Ordinary days, her laugh, you next to me, and I hate that it took a crisis to make me see how much I took it for granted." And I nodded, throat tight. I took it for granted too, the safety of us, how solid it felt until it wasn't. And he stopped then, turned to face me fully on the pine needle path, took both my hands, and said, "I want to ask something, and it's okay if the answer's no right now. I want to try being close again, really close. Not just holding hands or sleeping in the same bed, but making love, when you're ready, because I miss all of you, not just the parts that are easy." And the directness surprised me, made heat rise in my cheeks despite the cool air. But it wasn't pressure, it was an honest want wrapped in patience. So I squeezed his hands, said, "I miss it too. I'm scared it'll feel different, like something's broken in the way we touch, but I want to try, slowly. Tonight maybe, after she's asleep." And his eyes softened, relief and gratitude mingling there, and he kissed me then, soft and lingering, right on the trail, with Emily's distant giggles echoing ahead, a kiss that tasted like pine and possibility, rather than desperation. And when we caught up to her, she rolled her eyes at our linked hands, gross, parents kissing, but grinned anyway, looping her arms around ours, so we walked 3 abreast, a clumsy, perfect unit. That evening, we built the fire pit down by the water, logs crackling as the sun sank, marshmallows toasting on sticks. Emily insisted on double dipping in chocolate, and after she yawned her way through s'mores, we carried her up to the loft bedroom, tucked her under the quilt with the faded stars, read 2 chapters of her current favorite about a girl who finds a magic compass, and when her breathing deepened into sleep, we slipped downstairs, leaving the loft light on low, and sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, the room warm and flickering, no lamps on, just firelight painting our faces gold and shadow. We didn't rush, we talked first, low voices about nothing and everything, the way the lake looked like black glass tonight, how Emily's handwriting was getting neater, how therapy was starting to feel less like punishment and more like maintenance. And then, wordlessly, he reached for me, pulled me gently into his lap facing him, legs straddling his, and we kissed slowly, rediscovering the shape of each other's mouths, the taste of chocolate still faint on his tongue, my hands sliding under his shirt to feel the familiar warmth of his back, the small scar from that biking accident years ago. And when clothes came off, it was careful, deliberate, no frantic urgency, but a quiet reclaiming, his fingers tracing the stretch stretch marks on my hips like they were maps he still knew by heart, my palms flat against his chest, feeling the quickened beat there. And when he entered me, it was slow, eyes locked, a soft gasp from both of us at the rightness of it after so long apart. Not just bodies, but the trust that let us be this vulnerable again. And we moved together unhurried, breaths mingling, my forehead against his, whispering each other's names like affirmations. And when the release came, it was quiet, shuddering, tears on my cheeks, not from pain, but from the sudden certainty that we could still find this sweetness after everything, that the hurt hadn't poisoned the well completely. Afterward, we stayed tangled on the rug under the throw blanket, his arm around me, my head on his shoulder, watching the fire die down to embers, and he said against my hair, "I love you, more now because I know what it costs to choose this." And I turned my face into his neck, murmured, "I love you too," and I'm starting to believe we can keep choosing it, the words feeling true in a way they hadn't for months. Scarred, yes, but the scars were beginning to knit, tougher tissue forming where the wounds had been rawest. And as the cabin settled into silence around us, lake lapping softly outside, Emily's faint snores drifting down from the loft, I felt the forgiveness taking root, not sudden or complete, but emerging in layers, hard-earned and honest, a reconnection that went deeper than skin, touching the places we'd both hidden our fears and failures. And in that quiet glow, I let myself imagine a future where this closeness wasn't fragile anymore, but something we tended daily, like the fire we'd built tonight, fed with care so it would last through the cold. Sunday we spent lazy, pancakes with too much syrup, a slow row around the lake in the old aluminum boat, Emily trailing her hand in the water, spotting fish, pointing out a heron that lifted off with heavy wings. And when we packed to leave in the late afternoon, the goodbye to the cabin felt different, less like escape and more like carrying the repair home with us, the memory of firelight and shared breath tucked away like a talisman against whatever came next. And on the drive back, Emily fell asleep in the back seat, clutching her new collection of smooth lake stones, Alex's hand resting on my thigh as the highway unrolled, radio low, playing songs we both knew the words to, and though Vanessa still existed somewhere out there, her campaign a scar we'd always carry, the weekend had shifted the balance. Her power to wound felt smaller against the evidence of what we were rebuilding, piece by deliberate piece. And as the city lights appeared on the horizon, I squeezed his hand, let the quiet hope settle deeper, knowing forgiveness wasn't erasure, but the choice to keep loving through the marks left behind, stronger for having survived them. A year to the day since that termination email arrived like a quiet detonation in my inbox, I stood at the kitchen window watching rain streak the glass in slow, silvery trails, the same kind of gray February afternoon that had once felt like an omen, but now registered simply as weather, ordinary and passing, the coffee maker gurgling its final drops into the pot while Emily, 11 now, all long limbs and quick opinions, sat at the island counter doing algebra homework with the kind of fierce concentration that used to belong to me during late-night campaign planning sessions, her pencil scratching steadily, earbuds in, humming faintly along to whatever playlist she'd curated this week. And Alex moved behind me at the stove, stirring the chili we'd decided on for dinner because it was easy and comforting, and because Emily had requested the spicy one with the beans Dad makes better than you, a teasing jab that had made us both laugh last night when she said it, the sound still startling in its ease after so many months when laughter had felt like something borrowed from another life. I poured 2 mugs, his black, mine with the oat milk we still bought even though the brand had changed its packaging twice since last year, and handed him his without looking, our fingers brushing in that now familiar way that carried no charge of hesitation, just the quiet knowledge of routine rebuilt. And he murmured thanks, set his mug down to taste the chili, then turned the burner to low, came up behind me and looped his arms around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder, the warmth of him solid against my back as we both watched the rain, the same view we'd stared at numbly that first night when everything felt irreparably fractured. 1 year, he said softly, not a question but an acknowledgement, and I nodded, leaned back into him just enough to feel the steady rhythm of his breathing match mine, the way it had started to again after months of separate rhythms, separate beds on the hardest nights, separate silences that had eventually given way to careful conversations, then longer ones, then the kind where we could sit in quiet without needing to fill it. The house smelled of cumin and tomatoes simmering, the living room lamp already on against the early dark, Emily's backpack slung over a chair with the zipper half open, spilling colored pencils and a crumpled permission slip for the spring science fair. And somewhere upstairs, Tyler's weekend duffel waited. He'd arrive tomorrow for his every other weekend stay, the custody rhythm unchanged, but the atmosphere around it softened. Vanessa's texts now brief and logistical, no more veiled barbs or surprise drop-ins. The legal letter Alex had sent through his attorney 6 months ago, citing ongoing interference in third-party employment matters, having finally drawn the line she couldn't cross without consequence, though we both knew the real boundary had been drawn in therapy rooms and late-night talks, and the slow, deliberate choice to keep showing up for each other, even when showing up felt like swallowing glass. I turned in his arms, looked up at him, still the same face I'd fallen for it 12 years ago, but the lines around his eyes deeper now, earned, the way mine were too, and said, "I got an offer today," the words slipping out calm, almost casual, though my heart had jumped when the email pinged in during lunch. A remote marketing director role at a mid-sized nonprofit I'd applied to on a whim 3 months ago. Salary not quite what I'd lost, but close enough. Flexible hours, meaningful work helping fund literacy programs, and they'd called my references, the ones I'd rebuilt carefully, former colleagues who'd vouched for me after I explained the miscommunications without bitterness. And the hiring manager had said on the call, "We're excited about what you bring," a sentence that landed like medicine after a long fever. Alex's eyes widened, then softened, pride flickering there before anything else, and he cupped my face with both hands, thumbs brushing my cheekbones. "Tell me everything." So I did, right there in the kitchen with the rain drumming overhead, the details spilling out, the interview questions about crisis management that I'd answered with unflinching honesty, about what I'd learned from being on the receiving end of sabotage, the team I'd be joining, the start date in 6 weeks, and he listened the way he'd learned to in therapy, no interrupting to fix or celebrate prematurely, just presence. And when I finished, he kissed me slow and deep, tasting of coffee and relief, then pulled back to say, "I'm so damn proud of you, and not just for getting the job, for how you kept going when it would have been easier to stop." And the words hit the tender place that still ached sometimes, the place that remembered nights crying on Mara's couch or staring at rejection emails until my eyes burned. But the ache was quieter now, more scar than open wound, and I whispered, "I couldn't have done it without us figuring this out together," meaning every painful session, every small act of transparency, every time he chose to forward a message instead of deleting it, every night I chose to stay in our bed instead of retreating to the guest room. Emily looked up then, pulling one earbud out. "What's going on? You guys are being all mushy again," her tone mock-exasperated, but her eyes bright, curious, and we laughed, the sound filling the room easily, and I said, "Mom got a new job, kiddo." She whooped, jumped off the stool to hug me hard around the waist, then Alex, then both of us at once in a clumsy group embrace that smelled of chili spices and teenage shampoo, and for a moment the three of us stood there, arms tangled, the rain outside a soft underscore to the ordinary miracle of this moment, family, scarred and mended, still standing. Later, after dinner, when Emily had cleared her plate without complaint and gone upstairs to text her friends about the science fair idea she'd just hatched, Alex and I loaded the dishwashers side by side, hips bumping in the narrow space the way we used to before everything cracked, and he said quietly, "I still wake up sometimes thinking about that email, wondering if I could have stopped it sooner." I dried my hands, turned to him. "I still wake up sometimes wondering if I'll ever fully trust the ground under me again, but then I look at you, at her, at this house, and I remember we rebuilt it together, not back to what it was, but something stronger because we know now what it costs to let it erode." He nodded, pulled me close again, and we stood there swaying slightly to no music, just the patter of rain and the hum of the fridge, and I felt the quiet hope that had flickered so tentatively a year ago, now burning steady, not a bonfire, but a hearth fire, warm enough to live by, fed daily with the small choices, therapy appointments kept, hands held in the dark, truth spoken even when they stung, forgiveness offered not as absolution, but as a bridge we both crossed every day. Vanessa remained a distant figure, her campaign a closed chapter we referenced only when necessary, its cost measured in lost time and salary, but weighed against what we gained, a partnership tested and tempered, a daughter who saw her parents choose repair over rupture, a life that carried visible seams but held firm. As the evening wound down, and we turned off lights room by room, climbing the stairs together, I paused at Emily's door to watch her sleeping form curled under the quilt, stuffed rabbit still tucked beside her even at 11, then followed Alex into our bedroom, slipped under the covers, and reached for his hand without thinking, fingers lacing naturally, the gesture so unremarkable now, yet so profound in its return to normalcy. "We made it," I whispered into the dark, and he squeezed once, murmured back, "We're still making it." The simple truth of it settling over us like a blanket, scarred, yes, changed forever, but closer in the ways that mattered most, honest, resilient, quietly hopeful that tomorrow would bring more ordinary days like this one, days where love wasn't perfect but persistent, where family wasn't unbreakable but stubbornly, beautifully repaired, and that was enough, more than enough, to carry us forward into whatever came next.